Okay, thank you. So I'm just going to begin with a couple of slides to put the work that the forensic work that was done there into some context. So it's a short time I have, so I'll rattle through them when I can. Just a quick graphic of Bosnia and Herzegovina, as you can see, surrounded by the various countries that were against the Bosnian Muslims from 1992 onwards. And as you know, safe areas were created by the UN in 1993, and I think it's worth reminding you about this term safe areas because this was deliberate, it was ambiguous because to call it a safe haven would have meant that there was some liability involved for protecting the so-called safe areas and its population. So safe areas actually means very little. Their mission was to protect civilians, escort humanitarian aid, and disarm. In return, the Serbs agreed to disarm the Bosniaks, and then the Serb army would retreat. And of course, that didn't happen. The UN failed to protect safe areas or the population. Humanitarian aid and convoys were robbed, airdrops failed, there was starvation and disease, and the water and power supplies were cut, as they were throughout the other safe areas and throughout Bosnia. On the 11th of July, as you know, Mladic entered the safe area of Srebrenica, and at Potocari, the UN HQ demands that the UN hand over all the men. Meanwhile, he reassured the women that you won't be harmed because the men were being taken for questioning. And so I became involved through a charity called Physicians for Human Rights, which I joined in 1995, expecting to go to Rwanda, but instead ICTY contacted me and said that there were a small team of forensic specialists had planned to go out because they had discovered what they believed would be mass graves in around the Srebrenica area. And this image you can see from the Bratunac area in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I've just listed some details of some of the graves that were there. In Bratunac, over 3,000 Muslim men were held in a warehouse there and subsequently killed. And before I show the next slide, I just wanted to say to you that I was advised whilst I was in Denmark that I didn't show, asked me why I didn't show any graphic images of mass graves, and I pointed out two things. One, that I felt that they might upset people or and be disrespectful to the dead, but also photography of any kind except official photography was banned. In those days, we didn't have any. There was no digital cameras, and so the films and even the cameras were secured and sent to the Hague. So I've decided on this occasion to let you see one or two photographs that were given to me by a photographer out there, just to give you an idea of what we were faced with. And this is an image of a mass grave in Police farm near Srebrenica. And as you can see, it's a pretty gruesome area, a task to have to untangle these bodies and then begin to investigate and carry out the investigations into how they had died, how they were killed, etc. And so the first thing that was done was that ordnance around the disturbed earth was cleared because there was incendiary devices and explosives found there. And then any surface evidence would be gathered. The bodies would then be exhumed and transferred to a temporary mortuary. And that temporary mortuary in 1996, when I first went out there, was in Galicia. Um, and this was a pretty grim place. It was a bombed out garment factory. And there was, as I said before, there was no running water and electricity was sporadic. And I should add that there was very little food, not just for us, but for everyone in the area. But for us especially, having very little PPE was an issue. And one of the upsetting things for us was to realise that women would turn up at the gates of the temporary mortuary looking for their loved ones' remains because they were beginning to believe that they weren't going to return home to them. And we were banned from speaking with them, which I found particularly upsetting because part of my job at home was to be able to answer any questions from the bereaved about our process and give them some information about their loved ones' bodies. And so what I hadn't realised until 2 weeks ago, speaking with Peter McCluskey, who was the senior prosecutor in The Hague, he explained to me that he was actually at that mortuary. I hadn't realised that. And he understood totally the conditions that we had to undergo there. I should stress that this was the very first mission of its kind, and certainly in Bosnia. And it was a learning experience for all of us. But there were some mistakes made there, which was inevitable, that we learned from. And one of the issues that was pressure put on us to try and deal with as many victims' bodies as possible. And I'd like to stress that the specialists, the experts who went out there, in particular the forensic pathologists, refused to hurry their work at all because they knew that these cases would end up in a courtroom, and any sign of any shortcuts would be picked up by the defence, and trials could be lost and have been lost in mistakes being made or shortcomings. And so this is an example of a photograph um, taken in the mortuary of the one of the victims' bodies. I'm sure you'll agree it's a pretty awful photograph, but the prosecutor, Peter McCluskey, stressed that this is what the Bosnian people want the world to know about. They want the world to know what it was like for their loved ones and what happened to them. And that's why I've decided to break my normal rule of showing graphic photographs. And here are just a couple of images of work being done in that temporary mortuary. And you can see in the photograph on the left of a police officer investigating an item I found in someone's shoe. It turned out to be a photograph of two children in the background, women, and this would help with the identification process. In the other photograph, you'll see a technician, a pathologist, and an anthropologist working. And on the floor, there's human remains, there's detritus lying around, and so this became a problem because of the lack of water. We couldn't really clean not only our workspace but ourselves. And living with families in Tuzla as we did, although they weren't told anything about our work, and but they could tell quite easily what we were doing. And this is just to give you an example of the number of graves that were found by 2002. And following the work in Galicia, it was decided the following year, in 97, that instead of teams going out near to the grave sites, bodies would be transported to a central facility in Visoko in Bosnia, which was a safe place. I should also say that we had to abandon the mortuary in Galicia at one point because we were told by the military that there was trouble just up the road caused by Serbs and we could be a target. So we had to leave that place for a time. And so the mortuary in Visoko was set up. It was a really good place. And so from 97 onwards, the team just expanded. By 1998, instead of having 2 or 3 pathologists, we had more than 10, all gathering evidence in this place. And here you can see some pictures which I shouldn't have taken, but I did, of 1 or 2 of my colleagues, a pathologist, setting up for a photograph of a bullet that was been lodged in the spine, a forensic anthropologist piecing together thousands of pieces of bones to make up, trying to establish an entry point of a bullet. And the other photograph is of myself revealing a bullet in the foot, in the heel of a victim. The work that was done there was meticulous, I should say. For example, the radiography forms that were filled in, X-rays were vital in terms of establishing where bullets were, etc. The post-mortem report contained 19 pages this was made up by the pathologist before they were able to sign a death certificate. The anthropologist form, you can see, was massive because we were told in 1997 that secondary graves had been discovered. And in fact, Peter McCluskey went out along with the chief investigator and found some of these secondary graves where instead of whole victims, they discovered 17,000 body parts that then had to be put together again in order to return the victims to their families. And here you see a victim from Prijedor, and I wanted to point out in this slide that the victims from the concentration camps in Prijedor had been in the ground since 1992, and they were skeletons, basically, and this made the work much more harder for the pathologists to identify not just causes of death, although they could do that, but signs of beatings, cruelty, sexual violence, etc. And other photographs, just a painting of 10 of the most notorious concentration camps. And so turning to the trial attorneys, I was keen to find out from them why, for example, Karadzic wasn't found guilty of genocide in Prijedor, where he was found guilty in Srebrenica. And he explained that, well, Srebrenica was pretty straightforward. Men were get rounded up and killed over just a few days, whereas in Prijedor, the deaths were over a longer period of time. But also, it wasn't just Muslims that were killed there. There were many Croats were murdered there as well, and so Karadzic was in fact found guilty of many other crimes, including persecutions, extermination, murder, deportations, and forcible transfer. And that came as a great sadness to the people of Prijedor, because the crimes that he committed there were just as bad as those elsewhere, and certainly in Srebrenica. And so the victims' families were deeply upset when genocide wasn't found. And the other thing was his sentence, after all his crimes, for 40 years in prison, for which he immediately appealed against as it being too harsh. Bearing in mind that many other some other of the perpetrators were sentenced to life imprisonment, including Mladic. And so as soon as Karadzic appealed against his sentence, Lauren Baig, the senior appeals prosecutor, appealed, stating that his sentence was too lenient, and that resulted in Karadzic's appeal being turned down and increased to life imprisonment. And he serves his sentence now in the UK, in the Isle of Wight. And what Laurel told me about the different personalities between Karadzic and Mladic was that during his defense, he tried to paint himself as a kind, caring poet, um, and was actually flirting with the attorney at times. And this bearing in mind the awful crimes that he was had been found guilty of, whereas Mladic was totally different. He was extremely offensive towards the prosecution, um, and he didn't recognize the court in any way. Um, and so Mladic, he's still serving his sentence in Srebrenica prison in The Hague, um, and because no other country in the world would take him. So that's basically it, other than to say that finally that um, experts from 32 countries around the world went out to Bosnia between 1996 and 2009 on a rotation to carry out this work. And as far as genocide denial is concerned, which you know is prominent around the world, we could say that that's not true. Um, and so basically, that's my talk. I'm sorry it's short, but there you go. Thank you.